So, what charity in Massachusetts or the greater Boston area did you volunteer or work for?
I primarily worked with my college, Gordon College, up in the North Shore. I worked through one of their student ministries, which was based on outreach to the homeless in Boston. On a weekly basis, about every Saturday morning, you go in and bring in some leftover bread and soup that we had from the kitchen and go to the commons and serve it. And the goal of this time was specifically to engage with the homeless population, talk with them, make friendships, figure out kind of what life is for, or like for them. And prior to me working with them, the school had this ministry started about 10 years before I showed up. So a lot of the homeless that showed up had, during those 10 years, transitioned either into temporary housing, had actually gone in and out of housing, back into homelessness, have got less homelessness, and have maintained housing. But they just kept coming back to meet with us because part of it was just having students who were interested in your lives, who wanted to talk to you, learn about who you were. And I think part of that made that group really exciting because a lot of the times when you encounter homeless on the street, maybe you're just walking somewhere and you're busy, or you don't really have the time to stop and engage. But this opportunity provided students, solid 2.5 hours to talk, fellowship, and then we pray together in the end.
Cool. And what specifically does that charity do for people?
So I mentioned a little bit about that kind of the community-driven aspect. Beyond kind of the food and soup we would bring in and the talking and kind of fellowshipping, we would organize clothing drives every year and would bring in stuff specifically designed for winter. I worked with the group for about 3 years during school, and for the first 2 semesters, I was just a student attending, and for my next 4, I was a leader. And part of that involved me connecting with previous leaders, learning a little about the ministry or what it was like during their time, and specifically connecting and coordinating with donations from people outside of the student body. So we've had previous students. I would be answering emails every week from previous students who said, "Hey, I did this ministry with Islands College, 8 years ago, and I really loved it, and I wanted to donate some items because now that I have a job, I'm able to do that more frequently." And so I would have to organize times to meet or pick stuff up or accept packages, things like that.
And so were those the jobs that you had specifically when volunteering for the charity?
So yeah, so that's specifically what I did for the charity, but also what we would end up doing also. So that was leading the clothing drives and bringing jackets and stuff and socks and toiletries.
Cool. Did you organize things to give to the homeless people, or did you get to interact with them directly, or were you able to do both?
So as a student, I would interact directly every week. I was initially a social work major, and part of me taking a leadership position in that ministry was that I had to take a little bit of a step back because now I had a responsibility to those students to make sure they were having a productive time, that they were safe, that they were not wandering off with people that just some of the homeless were being a little too aggressive verbally or politically or emotionally just having a bad day. I had to go and intervene and try to calm and diffuse situations. So when I became a leader, it did require that I not have as much personal interaction, but whenever I could, I was actively trying to talk with people. And part of it is just like having friends that you see every week. So you talk about their weeks, what they've been doing. Some of them like to talk about cooking, stuff like that.
And what led you to start doing volunteer work to help homeless people in the first place?
Actually, it was during my time at LCA. I don't know if Karen Bankston still teaches Spanish there.
I don't think so.
Okay. I think she may have retired last year, but she taught there for I think at least 15, 20 years, very long time. Great woman. But every year she would group into Starlight Ministries, which is in Boston. And the organization, they've been in Boston for a long time, but they specialize in going into, I want to say Copley Square. They go into a few different places in the evening, but with the goal of bringing food, basically talking with people who are homeless, and sharing the gospel, or if they are believers, talk about what the gospel means to them and how it plays a role in their life when they clearly are experiencing homelessness, whether it's temporary or more permanent, and how does it change their outlook on life?
All right. And how did you feel while you were doing your volunteer work?
Initially, it was a little frightening. When I was in high school, I'd never really worked with the homeless in a more one-on-one context. In middle school, I had worked with the Boston Project over a couple summers, and they're based in Dorchester, and a lot of the times they would do service projects into places like Pine Street Inn, Rosie's Place, and a few other shelters and food banks. And so I would encounter some homeless people, but they were people who usually already had housing or part of these programs and kind of knew how to behave around the kids coming in. They basically knew that, hey, you cannot misbehave when these kids are here. You're going to get kicked out really quickly. We really want to make sure these students are protected well. In high school, that barrier kind of got brought back a bit, and they still wanted you to be really safe, but they let you have a little more freedom in engaging with individuals. And then from those two programs, when I got to college, I had the opportunity to do this homeless ministry through Gordon, and it really just took off because I had a lot more frequent interaction. Because in middle school, it was almost like 1 week every summer, and then high school, it was 2 to 3 times a year, and then college, it became like a weekly thing.
Cool. And what had led you to continue doing the volunteer work, or if you were unable to continue, what made you stop?
So part of me discontinuing my kind of weekly volunteering was normally they had 2 leaders for the ministry, and I ended up being the only leader for about 3 semesters, and it's a lot of work to stack with school because I had stuff to do during the week, and then also I didn't really have, my whole Saturday was taken up. So in terms of getting schoolwork done, I was cramming it in late Saturday night, all of Sunday, and then during the week. And that just took a big toll on me because, I never really had a day to sleep in. And so after my 4th semester leading it, I basically told the office that kind of oversaw it. I was like, look, I can't just be one person leading this. I've looked for people in the past. No one's really wanted to lead with me. So you need to appoint people, or basically you need to find people more interested in doing this because I can't do this right now. And then after that, I took about a semester to a year off, kind of just to focus on my schoolwork. But I would go in at least once a month, and that was really enjoyable. Just not having to lead and being really able to actually be there and engage in a way that did not require so much responsibility.
All right. While you were doing volunteer work, did you actively try to get others to do it with you?
Yeah, so it was surprisingly difficult to do that. You experience it in high school, but you really love Saturdays. They're awesome. In college, they become even more exciting because you just can sleep more if you like doing that. It's basically the day to yourself, whereas during the week you're often doing classes. And so to get people to go into Boston and to basically engage with the homeless, it took a lot of work. And for the 4 semesters I did it, I would always invite people on my floor. I would talk to them about it. I would basically send out emails and checking with people. And I think about maybe 5% of the people I talked to would actually show up and go at least one weekend. And then an even smaller percentage would continue coming back. On average, we had about 12 to 15 students every week.
Do you have any personal experiences with a homeless person or a group of homeless people that had a very strong impact on you?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that a couple of the people that we would meet in Boston had been showing up to meet Gordon students for at least 10 or 15 years. And so part of engaging with them was just learning about the history of the ministry and what it meant to them. For a lot of them, this was the highlight of their week. And even though they had students passing in and out over time, some of them still kept in contact with people and previous leaders that had served in the ministry, just because it was people who it was friendships. And so those lasted beyond just the ministry. And some of the past leaders I talked to had invited some of the homeless they had met to their weddings, to their graduations, to when they presented some of their senior year seminars. Anytime they were in Boston, they would always try to reconnect. So these are things that kind of reach beyond the ministry. And so I think hearing about that and seeing that really made a huge impact. And then especially as you make your own friendships that last beyond the ministry. I still get calls from one of the people I worked with who was with that ministry for the whole time it existed, and he calls me about, I don't know, every other week, and we talk for a bit, and we just hear, I hear about how his life's going, and, he's still in housing, and I talk to him and encourage him about what he's doing, and he likes to hear about my schoolwork, or what I'm doing for jobs and stuff like that.
Right. Did you have any previously conceived notions about homeless people before you did your volunteer work, and were they proven right or wrong?
Yeah, so middle school, I was incredibly ignorant. I think a lot of middle schoolers are. That's just part of growing up. And specifically in connection to homelessness, if you haven't encountered it or encountered people who have worked with homeless people, you get a lot of notions of they're dirty, maybe it's their fault they're homeless, they're all drug addicts or, alcoholics or things like that. And for a lot of the homeless, that is true. And I don't mean that to apply that blanket statement as a sense of all homeless are that way, but to more address the fact that a lot of the homeless suffer from mental illness. They do suffer from addiction. And one of the issues is that they can't get treatment. And over the years, and more recently, there's been a decreasing in the stigma around addiction so they can get better treatment. But yeah, when I first encountered homeless, I was very nervous. I didn't want to deal with, drug addicts and alcoholics. It just scared me. My few encounters with them, they are people who are usually relatively violent, lots of yelling because they are drunk, they're getting into fights. And, when you encounter those ministries in middle and high school, you get more of the polished and the kind of more well-kept homeless, I guess. And like I mentioned earlier, the groups I was going in with specifically would the people, the homeless population they were working with knew what these groups are doing, and so they themselves would act on their best behavior because they wanted these students to understand homelessness in a way that's not just, violence and sadness and sorrow, but also looking at them as human beings. And I think one of the things I did learn about is that, a lot of homeless people are dirty, and I don't mean that in a spiritual but just in the physical sense. Sometimes they're covered in, sometimes they have food in their beards, they're unshaven, maybe they haven't been able to shower recently, and so part of engaging with that during the ministry was that, I would shower before heading in, and then I'd come back, and I'd have to shower again. And that was, for me, that was just part of kind of doing the ministry. I'd get stains on my clothes, people would want to hug me, and, you're obviously not going to hug these people, because they're humans. But I just be careful because I make sure to wash my hands because I had to be working with food and I didn't really want to get people sick.
Right. And overall, have your experiences with or volunteering to help the homeless changed or impacted you in a significant way?
Yeah, overall, yes. I think part of it has taught me to be more sympathetic towards people and more merciful towards people's situations. And I guess understanding that, life doesn't always give us an ideal situation, and there are people who are really a much different life than us, even if it's someone who has housing or their parents are struggling to make ends meet. Homelessness is really just a very different thing as a whole, and the huge toll it takes on you is it made me really a lot more grateful for what I actually had experienced in my own life between having a house, not having to worry about where I'm going to sleep at night, not worrying what I'm going to eat, being able to shower in the morning. So yeah, it's time to be a little more grateful and then just be more merciful to these people, and learning to understand that, some of them may have been responsible for why they're homeless in regards to their actions, but that didn't mean that they wanted to be homeless. And it may have been because they got addicted to drugs, or maybe a lot of the times it was just they lost their job and they were already living paycheck to paycheck. And because they had to choose, do I have a bed to sleep in, or do I eat, or do my kids eat? And so in the end of the day, they picked, my children will eat, I'm going to eat less, and we may not have housing. Or we're going to have, like, reduced income housing, or we're going to live in a motel. And so not everyone is homeless because of, poor life choices, but simply because life gave them some problems, and, they did the best they could with it, and it caused them to lose their housing.
All right, and what have you learned from your experiences?
So beyond learning about the homeless, I think learning about how to engage the community from, like, a school. So, like, I went to a Christian college, Gordon College, and it's interesting how many people are just don't want to work with the homeless, or are too tired, or don't care. And I understand where people are coming from, because honestly, a lot of Saturdays I was really tired and did not want to get up in the morning and go leave, but I still had to do it. Or that it's frightening for people. And so part of getting people engaged in the community is speaking to them in ways that it will encourage them to go in. It will reassure them about what they're going to experience. So, like, for my people on my dorm floor, they were nervous, or it didn't interest them, or they didn't want to talk to strangers. And a lot of times I have to say, just by showing up, you're probably making someone's week. And that's hard to say for a lot of events and a lot of people we encounter. But simply that you just showing up to meet them is probably going to be the single best thing of their week. And I don't mean that as in they don't have good things going on in the week, but that's something they'll tell you. And they're going to tell you how much it meant that you actually decided to show up to them and give up your Saturday. And for a lot of students, they just didn't want to do that. And a lot of the students I would reach out to were already engaged in things on Saturdays. And so, they were busy. But a lot of students who just chose to sleep in, I understood why they wanted to do it. But, it's hard to engage people if they're not interested. And I think working with the homeless is maybe not as glamorous or as exciting as some of the other opportunities we have on campus for service.
All right, and finally, what would you tell someone who is unfamiliar with how serious the issue of homelessness is?
Gosh. Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit earlier that it's pretty easy for people to enter into homelessness. In some of the social work courses I took, we talked a lot about kind of what we have as the safety net, or ways of supporting ourselves or being supported by others. And a lot of times it's things like, hey, if we're going to go homeless, we can always fall back on our parents. If we lose a job, we can always just move them back to our parents, or, we have someplace to go. But when, you have bad family relations, or, you just don't have parents, they're dead, or your family members don't care about you, or stuff like that, that kind of takes away that option when, maybe someone loses their job or is suffering from addiction. And I think part of it is getting people just to be mindful of what they do have. And part of why I really wanted people to experience this ministry was so they would be more grateful for what they had. Because oftentimes it's not telling someone about this, about how they're unfamiliar with homelessness is not the same as hearing people's stories and looking people face to face and basically hearing them tell you how they became homeless and really how you understand it. It kind of wasn't their fault. It's just things did not go well for them.